Welcome on in, football fans. It's your boy, Gsluke, here with a little Thursday night football preview for tonight's game between the Titans and the Steelers. Gonna go through what you need to know both for DFS and for props tonight to go out there and have yourself a profitable evening. Of course, guys, you know I'm a huge Steeler fan myself, so certainly hyped for tonight's game. But more importantly, it's a slate to go out there and try and make some money. So we'll focus on some of the ownership game theory side when it comes to those large field GPPs. And then afterwards, we'll take a look at the prize picks and underdog fantasy boards and bring you a few props that you might want to keep an eye on yourself. So a lot of value to get into here. Let's go ahead and start it off with a look at our DFS preview. For tonight's slate, we've got a close spread, right? Just a point or two spread, separating these two teams. And anytime that's the situation, I always implore you guys to go out there and just pick your script, right? Everyone, when they see that close spread, is extremely prone to go out there and just build 3-3s, maybe even 4-2s in either direction. A quick way to get different tonight, right? Whether you think the Titans go out there and ride Will Levis, or you think the Steelers at home go out there and roll like somebody like I do, either way, right? Pick your script, right? And stick to it. Because on a night like this, when you don't have that clear 7 to 10 point spread, people have a really hard time committing to building their lineups. So if there's any piece of advice that you can take from this video, it's to go out there, pick a script, and completely commit to it, right? Go out there, build all 20, all 150 lineups, whatever you're entering, following that exact script. And honestly, the more extreme that you can make that script, the better off you're going to be. So a few scripts that we'll talk about, right? First off, the chalky script is likely to be the Steelers led side. First off, a lot of people are Steeler fans out there. They're one of the bigger fan bases, but on top of that, they're the home team and the favorite, right? Going against a rookie quarterback. So in general, I'd expect most people to side towards the Steelers, but a lot of them are going to do it with 3-3s, maybe spending up there on the Steelers side and using some of the Titans as buybacks, right? Doing it in terms of salary, right? Stacking the Steelers, or going with some 4-2 lineups. I don't think that 5-1s are going to be all that popular. And then, of course, if you want a slightly lower owned stack, only 1.5 point underdogs at this point, go with the Titans, right? And a lot of people that go with the Titans side are going to use Derrick Henry as the showcase. So if you're using the Steelers, right, assuming that they win, it's maybe a little bit more of a defensive matchup, right? You probably see a lot of Steelers defense in those lineups. And you're also probably going to see a lot of Najee Harris, right? Probably Deontay Johnson because he's a PPR monster. Whereas if people are stacking the Titans, they're probably going to go with a Derrick Henry captain, right? Assume that he's getting maybe 20 plus touches, that 100-yard rushing game that he's fully capable of against a really shoddy Steelers rushing defense. Those are going to be your chalky scripts, right? In terms of maybe outside of the box ways to attack it, maybe it's the passing attack for the Titans, right? Maybe Will Levis goes out there and lights the world on fire again. That would be a little bit of a contrarian way to get to the Titans side. Or over there for the Steelers, maybe assume it's Kenny Pickett, right? Rather than Najee Harris, the PPR monster, and somebody like Deontay Johnson. Maybe Kenny Pickett does throw for 2, maybe 3 touchdowns tonight, something that doesn't happen very often for him. But if he were to do that, that would completely change the scenario, right? Guys that are more touchdown monsters, like a potential Connor Hayward, right, could get himself into the optimal. George Pickens, right, is a huge touchdown player for the Steelers, would get a huge boost in that kind of script. So, even if you want to take a relatively chalky script, right, just go with a 4-2 or a 3-3 in either direction, I think there are slightly contrarian ways to get there, right? Whether it's avoiding Derrick Henry on the Titans, or it's leaning into the passing attack of the Steelers. So there are plenty of ways to attack tonight. Now let's talk about what I'm doing. So we talked about all the different scripts that you can go with. I'm going with the passing attack of the Steelers. So huge surprise, right? I'm going with a Steelers heavy script, but I'm trying to do it in a slightly more contrarian way, right? The most popular script tonight is going to be to take like a Najee because he's there at like 13 carries on most sports books, has a relatively high touch floor. A lot of people like that when they're playing in Showdown. But on top of that, like a PPR monster like Deontay Johnson, you can see in terms of points per dollar, right, is one of the better plays on the slate and also has an extremely high floor on a point per reception kind of format that we have here with Draftkings. So rather than going with a lot of those players, it's going to be like a George Pickens captain for me, potentially even a Kenny Pickett captain out there, which is maybe suboptimal. It's worth noting that Kenny Pickett, though he doesn't have an injury tag, is dealing with some sort of rib injury. They haven't said whether it's completely broken ribs, maybe it's a bruised rib cage, whatever it is, he is dealing with quite a bit of discomfort in his abdomen. So I would be remiss not to mention that, right? This is a script that is going to be lower owned because of all of that injury news, but don't think that it's a for sure thing, right? Of course, guys, I'm the Homer Steeler fan out here. And like I said, just pick a script and go with it, right? If you're going to be a Homer Steeler fan like myself and use that as your script, just make sure you're building your lineups in a correlated and a differentiated way, right? If you're going with the Titans stack, which is going to be even more contrarian, right? Just go full out on it, right? Don't half-ass your lineups tonight. Don't be like the field, especially in those large field GPPs, that's going to build these lazy 3-3s. They feel safe, right? They are easier to build, right? You're not taking as much of a leap of faith, right? Going out there and playing a 3-3 lineup, but just know that on these type of nights, they're going to be like 50-60% of the field, right? And if you can avoid that build at all costs, you'll be just fine, right? Even if it is slightly more chalky, even if you take the Titans build with Derrick Henry, or you take the Steelers build with more of the PPR Najee Harris, that is much, much preferred over that 3-3 build that I was talking about before. If you're looking at value plays, now we'll go player by player. Right up top, guys, everyone's in play, right? It just kind of depends on the script that you're going with. If you're going with that passing heavy Titans script, right? DeAndre Hopkins, obviously at the top of that list after a 3-touchdown week. Like I said, on the Steelers side, that's probably a George Pickens. But what we want to focus on now is some of the value plays, right, where you're going to win the slate. You can take a look at the Steelers defense. Have to say they are getting some ownership, so you got to worry about that a little bit. The kickers are okay in this kind of matchup. I'd say especially Nick Folk, right, especially with that inexperienced rookie quarterback. Might have a few issues there. Treylon Burks, I think, is a high upside play that not many people are getting to. He was touted as the fantasy wide receiver for the Titans, perhaps even better than somebody like Hopkins. There were people drafting him right around where DeAndre Hopkins was getting drafted in some drafts this year. And he, of course, had that devastating injury early on, right? Hasn't played all that much, but from a long-term pedigree perspective, this is their clear number 2 wide receiver, and last week had no catches, right? So he's going way under the radar. Nobody is thinking about Treylon Burks. Maybe this is the week where he goes out there and gets that 5-6 catch game, right? People were expecting that coming into the year. Will Levis looked pretty competent as a quarterback. So in terms of like a breakout low-owned value play, for me, it's Treylon Burks, right? You got Chigokonkwo, who's getting a little bit more ownership. You could throw Kyle Phillips in there. He's another player that will see snaps for the Titans team. I just expect Treylon Burks to have a higher snap share than Phillips, right? Phillips has played over the last 2-3 weeks because of the injury concerns. You know, now that Treylon Burks is healthy, I do think that he's going to get the lion's share of the snaps out there. So value plays, you could look at Connor Hayward too, right? Starting tight end for the Steelers with Pat Freiermuth out. Allen Robinson not seeing as many snaps with Deontay back. Same thing with Calvin Austin, but both are still seeing the field. So if you're playing 150 lineups, right, you're mixing in a lot of exposure for tonight. You can still take a Calvin Austin and Allen Robinson, but just know they aren't nearly the same type of plays that they were before with Deontay Johnson out, right? Like we had on a few of those primetime slates. In terms of pure flyers, Chris Moore has now been demoted to the number 4, maybe even number 5 wide receiver out there for the Titans, but he does still play, and typically when he gets the ball, it's for like a 30-40 yard catch. So I still think he's in play at $400, especially with the price decrease. Darnell Washington going to play snaps for the Steelers, right? Anytime you have somebody that's going to be on the field at the minimum price tag, that's at least worth a few looks if you're playing 150 lineups, but especially when it's a tight end that can catch the ball in the red zone, that's like 7 foot tall, like Darnell Washington is. If you haven't seen this guy, he's an absolute unit. It's I hope he gets a few balls tonight. It'd be pretty good to see. He looks like an absolute alien out there. It looks like he's from another planet. Outside of that, though, that's probably about it for flyers, right? You got Darnell Washington, who will actually see the field. Anthony McFarland is returning from injury. Issue is we have no idea if he's going to be involved, right? You got Jaylen Warren ahead of him. You've also got Najee Harris, right? The clear number 1 and number 2 running backs there. Outside of the return game, where I think Anthony McFarland will be leading them in the return game, I don't expect him to make that much of an impact out there. All right, now for a few props over here on Underdog. Then we'll hop into prize picks shortly afterwards. So first off, we got Treylon Burks over 2 receptions. He's at 2.5 on a few books, juiced heavily towards the under, but the few books that have him at 1.5, he's like at 175, even minus 200 towards the over. So 2 receptions is probably the correct number for him. The thing is is I think he's going to have a much bigger week than the rest of the industry, right? We already mentioned that he's going to be potentially that breakout star tonight. Last week did have 2 targets, no receptions last week though, and that was his first week back from that devastating injury. So now that he's had a few practices under him, right? Will Levis is playing quarterback, who I think is actually an upgrade over Ryan Tannehill before. At 2 receptions, brings plenty of push equity, as you can see with those -170, -200 odds for the over at 1.5, but also in my opinion, plenty of over equity, right? Those states that have him at 2.5, that have him so heavily juiced towards the under, I would expect by game time. This is my hot take on it, right? I don't have a crystal ball. Not 100% going to happen. I would expect those odds to start to come back towards even money. He's the type of player that if they see him healthy out there, he had all that preseason hype, that you'd expect him to get targeted, right? And honestly, at 2.5 receptions, I think that that's the fair line for Treylon Burks. So I'm taking the over at 2 receptions here, knowing we have that push in our back pocket, but also just a player that I think is going to be a lot more involved tonight than the rest of the industry seemingly does. And then this over on Najee Harris, I actually got it 13 rushes, so maybe not as good a prop as what I got before and what I posted on Patreon, but still a prop I'd take the over on. Not only is it slightly correlated with Treylon Burks, right? If Najee Harris is going to get 14 plus touches, that means this is at the very least a competitive game, right? If not a game that the Steelers are leading. Najee Harris, right? A player that gets volume when the Steelers are trying to run out the clock. That kind of game script is highly correlated to Treylon Burks getting more targets. So you have some slight correlation there. It's not amazing correlation, right, on this 2-man slip, but it's enough to make it something that I went after over here on Underdog Fantasy. Luckily for us, over on Prize Picks, we still have that Najee Harris prop at 13. So if I was going to enter anything at this point, I would probably focus on Prize Picks, where we still have him at that projection. And Treylon Burks, though he doesn't have a receptions prop up yet, they do have his receiving yard prop up, which is the next best way to get exposure. Right? If he's going to go over that 2 reception mark, he's likely to get something in the 30+ yard range. But even if he does push it too, there's a good chance that one of those targets is down the field and that he could cover this receiving yard prop for us. So maybe not as safe, because I do like that push in our back pocket at 2, but still a prop that I'd take, especially considering that Najee Harris is still down at 13 rushing attempts. So those are a few props I've taken to this point. For the rest of my exposure I'm getting to, including my DFS player pool that you saw blacked out on the last sheet, make sure to check out the Patreon. There's a link down below. On there, you can join the tier that best suits what you're looking for and get access to all the behind the scenes info that I'm posting for every single slate. There's normally like 4 or 5 slips I'm posting for every primetime slate. Of course, guys, the entire player pool, core plays, all the different player notes that I'm posting for all my DFS player pool is all posted there on the Patreon. So supports the channel, helps me out with what I'm doing, and also gives you all those cheat sheets for your info. So check that out if that's something you've been wondering about. But that's all we got for the prop side. Alrighty, boys, that is all for the Thursday Night Football preview. Before you hopping out of here, go ahead, smash that like button for me, and also make sure you are subscribed to the channel so you don't miss any of the content in the future. We will have some main slate content out this week. Of course, all the different primetime previews that we're doing here on the channel. So make sure you are subscribed. So like I said, you don't miss any of those when they drop. Until next time, best of luck with those lineups with any prop slips that you're going with for tonight. If you're looking for all that behind the scenes info, check out the Patreon page in the description. But outside of that, that's all I've got for you guys. So best of luck out there. Appreciate the support, and I'll catch you guys for the main slate previews.